Studies suggest that the average person tells somewhere between 1 and 2 lies per every 10 minutes of conversation. Not malicious lies, not evil lies, just social lubrication. Small fictions we perform so smoothly, we don't even notice we're doing it. Let that sink in, 1 to 2 lies every 10 minutes. In a 1-hour conversation, you might have told 6 lies before you even got to the interesting part. Now here's the question nobody asks. What happens when you stop? What actually happens, not in movies, not in self-help books, but in the real world when you decide to be completely, unflinchingly, unapologetically honest. When you drop the performance and just show up as yourself. I'll tell you what happens. People get uncomfortable. Relationships fracture. You lose opportunities. You get labeled too much, too intense, too weird, too honest. We live in a culture obsessed with authenticity. It's in every TED Talk, every brand tagline, every therapy session. Just be yourself, own your truth, be authentic. It's the highest virtue of our age. And yet, the moment someone actually does it, we punish them for it. That's the paradox we're going to explore today. Because the agony of authenticity isn't just about the courage it takes to be real. It's about the fact that society, the very society preaching authenticity, is systematically designed to destroy it. The mask has a name. Before we talk about why authenticity is painful, we need to understand what inauthenticity actually is and how thoroughly it runs our lives. Sociologists call it impression management. The idea is simple and devastating. In almost every social interaction, you are not just being yourself. You are performing a version of yourself that you think the other person needs to see. Think about how you talk to your boss versus how you talk to your best friend. Think about how you behave on a first date versus how you behave alone at home at midnight eating cereal. Think about who you are on Instagram versus who you are at 3 a.m. when you can't sleep. These are not just different moods, they are different characters. And you switch between them so automatically, so fluently, that most of the time you don't even feel the transition happening. This isn't inherently bad. Social masks evolved for a reason. They're a form of social intelligence. They keep relationships smooth, hierarchies functioning, conflict at bay. The problem isn't that the mask exists. The problem is what happens when the mask becomes the only face you know how to wear. Because here's what nobody tells you. The longer you wear a mask, the more you forget there was ever a face underneath it. And when you finally try to take it off, when you finally try to show up raw and unfiltered, you discover something terrifying. You don't actually know what your real face looks like. You've been performing for so long that authenticity doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like nakedness. It feels like exposure. It feels like danger. That's the first layer of the agony. We're not just afraid of being judged. We're afraid of being seen, because being seen means being vulnerable. And vulnerability means someone has the power to reject the real you. Not the performance, not the character, you, and rejection of the performance is manageable. You just change the performance, but rejection of your actual self. That's the wound that doesn't close. Conformity is survival, and that's the problem. Let's go deeper. Because there's a reason the mask exists, a very primal, very old reason, and until you understand it, you'll keep fighting yourself instead of the system. For most of human history, social exclusion was not an emotional inconvenience. It was a death sentence. If your tribe rejected you, you died. No shelter, no food, no protection. The wilderness didn't care about your individuality. So your brain learned, at a neurological level, to monitor constantly and obsessively what the group thinks of you, to sense disapproval like a smoke alarm, to adjust your behavior, your opinions, your personality to maintain inclusion. This is why social rejection activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Your brain genuinely cannot distinguish between being left out of a group and being punched. The stakes, evolutionarily speaking, are identical. Now fast forward to today. The tribe is gone, the wilderness is gone. But the alarm system is still fully operational, running 24/7. Scanning every room you walk into, every text message you send, every opinion you express, asking the same ancient question. Are you safe here? Will they keep you? Authenticity asks you to override millions of years of survival programming. That's not a character flaw, that's biology, and it gets more complicated. Because conformity isn't just something we do to survive, it's something we enforce on others. There's a fascinating and disturbing phenomenon in social psychology called the deviance penalty. It works like this. When someone in a group violates the norms, even harmlessly, even admirably, the group doesn't just ignore them. They work to bring them back in line, and when they can't, they exclude them. Not because the deviant person harmed anyone, but because their mere existence challenges the assumptions everyone else has made. If you're living authentically and I'm not, your presence is a quiet indictment of my choices. And nobody likes to feel indicted, so authentic people make others uncomfortable. Not on purpose, not because they're doing anything wrong. Simply by existing in a way that refuses to play the game. This is why authenticity is so politically dangerous. Why whistleblowers lose their careers. Why the honest person in the meeting gets labeled a troublemaker. Why the friend who tells you the truth instead of what you want to hear eventually stops getting invited. Society doesn't hate liars in theory, it loves them in practice. Because liars make things smooth. Liars keep everyone comfortable. Liars are team players, the authenticity paradox. Here's where it gets philosophically strange. Because we've established that society punishes authenticity. And yet society also demands it, loudly, constantly, everywhere. Be yourself, you do you, speak your truth, authentic content, authentic leadership, keep it real. Every Instagram caption, every marketing campaign, every corporate value statement. Authenticity is the currency of our era, but look more closely at what's actually being celebrated. When we say be authentic, we almost never mean be fully, uncomfortably, inconveniently real. We mean perform realness in a way that's still palatable, still likable, still safe. The influencer who shares their real morning routine, but it's filmed in perfect light. In a beautiful apartment, with a carefully crafted vulnerability that never goes too far. The CEO who talks about his authentic journey, but keeps the messy embarrassing. Genuinely human parts carefully off-screen. The friend who says, just be honest with me, but flinches when you actually are. What we call authenticity in popular culture isn't authenticity at all. It's a highly produced performance of authenticity. It's realness curated. And this creates a uniquely modern form of psychological torture. Because you're told to be real, but you're punished if you're too real. You're told to be yourself, but only the presentable parts. You're told to speak your truth, but only if your truth is inspiring or relatable or non-threatening. The authentic self that gets celebrated is always the post-struggle version. The one who overcame, the one who made the messy part into a redemption arc. What's never celebrated is the messy part itself, happening in real time. The breakdown, the doubt, the ambivalence, the genuine confusion, not as content, but as life. That version of you, the unfinished, unresolved, genuinely unperformed version, society has no use for. It doesn't fit in a caption. It doesn't perform well. It makes people uncomfortable. And so, subtly, constantly, in 1,000 small social interactions, you learn to put it away. And then you wonder why you feel hollow. The cost of the mask. Let's talk about what sustained inauthenticity actually costs you. Not in abstract terms, in real terms, the first cost is exhaustion. Playing a character is tiring. Every interaction where you're managing how you're perceived, choosing words, monitoring reactions, suppressing impulses, performing enthusiasm you don't feel, burns through cognitive resources. This is why some people feel drained by social situations that should, in theory, be enjoyable. It's not the people that are exhausting, it's the performance. The second cost is disconnection. When you're performing, you're not actually in the conversation. You're above it, managing it. You're watching yourself interact rather than actually interacting. And the tragic result is that even when people respond positively to you, it doesn't land. Compliments don't penetrate, affection feels thin. Because deep down, you know they're responding to the performance, not to you. And so the more people love the mask, the lonelier the face underneath becomes. You can be in a room full of people who like you and feel completely alone. That's not social anxiety. That's what inauthenticity does over time. The third cost is self-estrangement. Here's a haunting idea. Identity isn't something you discover. It's something you construct through the choices you make and the things you express over time. When you suppress your authentic responses consistently, when you always say what's safe instead of what's true, you don't just hide yourself from others. You hide yourself from yourself. You gradually lose access to your own interior. You stop knowing what you actually think, feel, want, believe, because the machinery of self-editing has become so automatic that even your inner voice starts performing. Even your private thoughts get filtered through the question, but is this acceptable? This is one of the least discussed, but most insidious effects of chronic people-pleasing. It doesn't just make you dishonest with others, it makes you a stranger to yourself. And then when someone asks you, what do you want, or who are you, there's this terrifying blankness. Not because you have no self, but because you've been so busy managing everyone else's perception of you that you never actually built one. Why honesty gets you punished? Now let's be concrete about the mechanisms of punishment. Because this isn't vague, this isn't metaphorical. There are specific, identifiable ways that society penalizes authentic behavior, and understanding them is the first step to dealing with them. The first mechanism is social recalibration. When you deviate from your established social character, when you suddenly start saying what you actually think instead of what people expect, the people around you experience it as a disruption. Not necessarily as honesty, as instability. They don't know who you are anymore. And humans deeply crave predictability. The authentic version of you is, by definition, less predictable than the performed version. And less predictable reads, socially, as less trustworthy. This is why longtime friends sometimes react worse than strangers to acts of authenticity. The stranger has no prior model to violate. The friend has a whole relationship built on the performed self, and your authenticity threatens its foundation. The second mechanism is social labeling. Honest people get labeled: blunt, difficult; aggressive, intense, too much. These labels function as social corrections, ways of communicating your behavior is outside the acceptable range. Adjust it, and they're devastatingly effective. Because they work on your sense of identity. You don't just change your behavior, you start to believe the label. You internalize the idea that your authentic self is inherently problematic. The cruelest thing about social punishment is that it doesn't just change what you do. It changes what you believe you deserve to be. The third mechanism is opportunity cost. In professional settings especially, authentic behavior, expressing genuine disagreement, declining to perform enthusiasm, refusing to self-promote, is consistently associated with reduced advancement. The research on this is consistent and depressing. People who manage impressions skillfully, who perform confidence, positivity, agreeableness, are perceived as more competent, promoted faster, compensated better. This means the incentive structure of modern professional life is specifically designed to reward performance over reality. The mask is not just socially useful, it's financially beneficial. And authenticity has a quantifiable cost. So when you feel the pull to conform, when you swallow the honest opinion, smile through the bad meeting, perform the enthusiasm you don't feel, you're not being weak. You're responding rationally to a system that has made the cost of authenticity genuinely high. The question is, what are you paying for that rationality? The reframe, what authenticity actually is. Okay, we've spent a lot of time in the darkness. Now let's do something more useful than inspire you. Let's actually reconfigure how you think about this. The problem with the just be yourself framing is that it implies authenticity is a state you arrive at. A fixed point, you peel off the masks, you find the real you, you stay there, done. But that's not how identity works, and it's not how authenticity works either. Here's the reframe. Authenticity is not about having no mask. It's about knowing which mask you're wearing and choosing it deliberately instead of having it chosen for you by fear. Think about the difference between an actor and someone who's forgotten their acting. The actor wears a mask, but they know it's a mask. They can take it off after the performance. They have agency over the character. Most people in social life are the second type. They're not performing deliberately, they're performing automatically. Driven by anxiety, by the desire to avoid rejection, by patterns that formed in childhood and have been running unexamined ever since. Authenticity isn't the absence of performance, it's the presence of authorship. You're not trying to stop wearing masks. You're trying to become the one who decides which mask to wear and why, and when to take it off. This matters because it makes authenticity achievable. You don't have to become someone who blurts every thought and alienates everyone they meet. You don't have to choose between total rawness and total performance. You can be socially intelligent and authentic simultaneously, as long as your social intelligence is in service of your actual values, rather than in flight from your actual fears. The shift is subtle but profound. It's the difference between adjusting your communication style because you genuinely care about being understood, and suppressing your opinions because you're terrified of what happens if people disagree with you. Same behavior on the surface, completely different internal experience, and completely different long-term effect on your sense of self. Authenticity is not a destination. It's a practice of returning again and again to the question, is this actually what I think? Is this actually what I feel? Or am I just performing the expected response? You won't always get it right. You'll slip into the mask without noticing. You'll say the safe thing instead of the true thing. You'll shrink when you should stand. That's not failure. That's being human in a world that makes authenticity genuinely hard. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is noticing. The goal is catching yourself mid-performance often enough that the performance stops being the default. The hardest thing, I want to end with something that I think gets missed in almost every conversation about authenticity. We've talked about why being real is painful. We've talked about how society punishes it. We've reframed what it actually means, but there's one more thing. The hardest part of authenticity isn't facing other people, it's facing yourself. Because when you stop performing, when you get quiet enough to hear your actual thoughts, your actual desires, your actual grievances, sometimes you don't like what you find. Sometimes the authentic self isn't enlightened or evolved or inspiring. Sometimes it's petty, sometimes it's scared, sometimes it wants things it's ashamed to want. Sometimes it disagrees with the person it's been performing as for years. That confrontation with the unpolished, unperformed, genuinely unresolved reality of who you are is what most people are actually running from when they hide behind masks. Not judgment from others, but from the judgment they'd face from themselves. Authenticity requires you to be a fair witness to yourself, not a harsh critic. Not a defensive apologist, a fair witness. Someone who can see what's actually there, the good, the embarrassing, the complicated, and not immediately reach for the mask. That's the practice. That's the lifelong, unglamorous, genuinely difficult practice of being real. Not as a performance, not as a brand, but as a quiet daily decision to know yourself, and let that self gradually, carefully, selectively be known. The world will push back, it always does. People will find your honesty inconvenient, your refusal to perform threatening. Your authenticity, ironic as it is, uncomfortable. Some relationships won't survive it. Some opportunities won't materialize. Some rooms won't want you in them. But the alternative, the life lived behind a perfectly maintained mask. Applauded by everyone, known by no one, that has a cost too. A slower cost, a quieter cost. The kind you don't notice until one day you realize that despite all the approval, despite all the acceptance, despite every performance going perfectly, you don't actually feel real. And that is the deepest agony of all.